Good morning, everyone. So we have exactly 1 week left until Pesach, and I can only imagine the tremendous pressure that we all feel we're under. There's only 7 days left, and how we're going to manage to finish and fit in all the learning that we have to do before Pesach, right? There's all the halachas, all the haggadahs to go through. So, and especially since we don't have Seder here, Mamish, all the way up until Friday. I know a lot of you are complaining about that. So let's pick up. Let's continue in a sense where we left off at the end of last week. I know how disappointed the people who couldn't make it were to miss that, but for whatever reason. What we began discussing the different chashashes and chumras that we have at different products on Pesach, and I was trying to establish and lay out that essentially you already see this concept in Yishayim and Shulchan Aruch with regards to the specific products of their day, and the further away something came from, and the more there were unknown elements to the production of something, the more likely you were to see a chash and a chumrah. So it's an old story, nothing new. I brought a few examples from the Rabbi Shraga Dovid Homnick, and specifically we dealt with the question of mashka and Pesach, and the famous letter of Rabbi Zirelson. And then we moved on to the controversy in the Chassidish shtetl in Ukraine, where they had the factory that belonged to the Odin, and they wanted to machshir the factory for Pesach, and that was considered a tremendous chiddush. At the time, it created a storm, and Tzemach Tzedek was involved, and other great Chabad Rabbanim were involved at the time, Isaac of Vitebsk, the Divrei Nehemiah, and so we saw this concept that there's always concern when there's a new product, or like in the case of potato mashka, or concern about ingredients where we're not quite sure what's being done with them, how it's being produced. Or a factory where it's just a complex process in the factory and we're not sure what's going on there. And at the end of that, we went into the comparison, how to compare the Makaitis we have in writing about Pesach Dikamashka versus the more oral traditions that we have, and to what extent they do or don't completely add up. So whoever missed that, of course, I recommend there's always a video you can go and catch up. Of course, everything goes up on the channel. So from that topic, it's not too far a distance, not too far a trip to get to the next topic, which is sugar on Pesach. So if you open up Shulchan Aruch, Siman Tov Samach Zayin, which is the Siman from which we cited the other halachas from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch last time. So if you open up Shulchan Aruch, Siman Tov Samach Zayin, Sif Ches, in the Ramah, this is what it says in the Ramah. V'tzucker aser la'achloi va'afilu lehashhoisoi aser. Finished. Shiur's over. No, there's more to that. But the Ramah does say that it's aser to have sugar. What's the context there? The context there is, again, you had these already in the end of the Rishonim and Ashkenaz. You already had these concerns about different types of products, including sugar, and what the process was and what ingredients were being mixed in until it reached the Jewish hand. So if you look in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch there, and if you test Sif Chaf, so the Alter Rebbe already makes a few distinctions. The Alter Rebbe says if the sugar is made like a hat, and I'll identify that a bit later, but the Alter Rebbe says it's made like a hat and it's called hut zucker. So there's no chashash chametz really, and you could keep it on Pesach, but afal pikein, the minhag is to sell it to a guy before Pesach. That's the better sugar, but and the idea being that it's a larger block. But the sugar that's cooked and it's cut into smaller pieces, Alter Rebbe says it's called zucker candle, and then Alter Rebbe says v'chein minei belilois zucker shemechapen behem minei peres ubesamim. So that sounds more like powdered sugar, which is used to coat. You can have sugar coated this, sugar coated that, confectionery sugar. So the Alter Rebbe says there's already more of a chash chimutz, and you shouldn't keep it on Pesach at all, and you shouldn't eat it even on the last day, because the previous one he said maybe you could have on the last day. Then the Alter Rebbe says, though, there are many tzaddim to be makel here. First of all, who says there is flour? And if there is flour, maybe it was batal b'shishim. And if it wasn't batal b'shishim, maybe the flour came from wheat that never got wet in the first place. And if it got wet in the first place, maybe it didn't become chametz. And even though there could be other concerns, maybe it was cooked in chametz kalim, but that itself could be fine. Some are matir if it was cooked in a chametz kalim before Pesach. And this is based on kadmonim, the Benhagim Maharash in Germany, Maharil, Trumas. And the discussion, the conversation continues throughout the generations to determine and to discuss how far, what do we do with this halacha? How far do we apply it? Can we not apply it in some situations? So, for example, if you look in Shalos Chuvas Maram Shik, Eire Chaim Siman Reish Mem Vav, so there's a letter he wrote. He was in Chust. He wrote a letter in Teves Tafresh Lamed Beis, which is 1872, and he writes it to Mordechai Kornfein, who's a Meidel Adash Shleime Emunah B'nei Yisrael in Kahal Steinmanger. So just for a brief entertainment break, just a fun fact. So this city of Steinmanger, it's known today by its Hungarian name, which is pronounced something like Sombate. The German name was Steinmanger. We know these different places were under different control at different times. It's in West Hungary near Austria. It's the 10th largest city in Hungary. But the fun fact that I wanted to share was, I saw something very interesting about this city. This is actually the oldest city in Hungary. We know that the Romans actually established this city. We know that all the Western European cities were the earliest ones were established under the Roman Empire. And in the year 43, Claudius gave it the name Colonia Claudia Savariensum. It was called Savaria, the Savarians. That was the name of the place and the people at the time. Constantine the Great actually visited Savaria a few times, and apparently there's still traces of all the Roman types of buildings and whatever it is, bathhouses, theaters, etc. There's, of course, a lot of history that happened afterwards. That's not important. But the interesting thing that I saw is that you look this up, they write that Jews were already in Savaria in the first century, in century 1. So, and if you look in there's a halachic researcher, Avram Fuchs, who wrote a book, who wrote a lot about Jews in Hungary. He wrote a book, Yeshiva Sangaria B'Gdulasan B'Churbanim. So, in the chapter on this city, he writes, the halachic assume, they speculate, whichever term you want to use, that the Jews were there already in the times of the Romans, and silent witnesses for that are that there are pieces of pottery and stones that are preserved in the local museum, upon which you find shapes of a menorah, shapes of palm trees, Jewish imagery. So interesting little historical factoid about this random Hungarian city. Akapanim, back to Tafresh Lamed Beis. So the Rav there, his name was Mordechai Kornfein, Mordechai Marcus Kornfein, and Tafresh Lamed Beis is actually right after the infamous Tailung in Hungary, where you had the Neologues and the Orthodox as two distinct religious, legally acknowledged movements. And apparently in this city, the Neologues were the majority, and the Orthodox had just split off, and they had chosen him as a Rav, so that's the Lashon, that he's the Meidel Adas Shlem Emunah B'nei Yisrael in Steinmacher. Anyway, so the question was, that Tzarcher Echad also Yain Kosher, and already back then, today it's an issue if you're into products on Pesach, the wine, to know whether there's sugar in the wine or not, and stam sweet wine, you should assume there is sugar in it, and dafka the ones that say no sugar added, don't have sugar. So this practice already goes back at least to Tafresh Lamed Beis in Steinmanger, and the Seicher made yain kosher, and right after B'tzira, he immediately added the sugar at that stage to sweeten it. The question is, you have to drink it on Pesach. Maybe we should filter it first. We can run it through a strainer, because Staka says what it says in Shulchan Aruch. But in our sugar, at this point, we don't really assume and think there's chametz, and it's kind of just like a chumrah. We're following the Shulchan Aruch's chumrah. So maybe here there's tarevis. It's mixed in with other stuff, so maybe it's fine. He's still quoting what the Rav essentially wrote to him, and he wrote that in and this is already the widespread practice, and even in Eisenstadt, they've been being had to drink wine like this on Pesach. So the Ramshik is not particularly agreeable. The Ramshik says that it's true that all the Achrayim have been writing in the last 300 years that there is no real chashash chametz in the sugar. But the Berkei Yosef, the Chida, wrote, B'kol Makom Yirei Shamayim should be careful, because besides for the early concerns that the Rishonim had, today is the concern that they dip the bread in the, you might have heard the word of dipping the bread, it's brought in the Svan, it's brought in the Paiskim, that they dip their bread while they're boiling the sugar. And there's the Shita, which you mentioned last time, that even if it's bottled before Pesach, but it's Chayzer V'neir on Pesach, so it will be Aser. Now, Shulchan Aruch, technically it says that it's not Eiser the Tarevis. Yaakov says, even less than Shishim is not Eiser the Tarevis. Only pure sugar is Aser. So the Chayre should be fine. But La'achrein, he says no, because you look in Yedei Deyasim and Kufyud Beis, talks about Pas Goy, and it says that if Pas Goy is mixed in, even if it's nice and tam, it's mutter. However, the Beis Yosef says that a Se'or of a Goy, even where generally, typically, something from a Goy, we're not Goyes, we're not Tarevis, but the Se'or, we are Aser. Why? We are Aser, because it says in Gemara Chol and the Gabi Demai, Se'or of Demai, that's the Tzushtel, that there's no, when Demai gets mixed into something, they're not Goyes and the Tarevis, but the Se'or and the Tavlin of the Demai that has an effect, that has a tam, that you add it to do something to the food, time malay bottom. And so the same thing goes for a Goy, Se'or shel Goy, it's betakenes hakoil, the yeast is a very important, crucial ingredient, so Mamela, it's the Iker, not bottom. The Magen Avram says in Simon Tov Nun Beis, cites the Torah, that if something is a maimet, then we consider it to be be'ein. It's considered a more powerful, more important part of it. And in Yedei Deya, the Pri Chadash proves that Se'or and Tavon are even more than a Davar HaMaimet. So if by Demai in the Gemara, and by Se'or shel Goy in the Beis Yosef, we say that if it's Avid L'Taima, that we consider that it's be'en. So here we're talking about a Safek Mashu Chametz, that's Aser be'en, they're only Matar B'Tarevis, but if it's Milsa David L'Taima, and it's Metaken, of course you're telling me that he's putting sugar in the wine, because that's what he wants the wine to taste like. It's a very important part of the wine. So Mela, we'll taina that it's Aser. And he says, don't taina that Hagufa, Tavlin should only Aser, should only not be bottled if the Tavlin is Aser mitzad itself. Mashenkin here, the sugar itself is B'chal, but the sugar itself is only a problem because of possibly Chametz. He doesn't accept that time either. He says over there, the Melach itself could potentially become Ois Isser. If there was enough Melach to Mevatel L'Dam, the Melach itself would be mutter. So therefore, even though there wasn't, you put that Melach in a tafshil. So even though it's the Iker in the tafshil, but since now the whole tafshil has Shishim, Keneged, Hadam, so we say it's fine. Mashaken over here, the sugar itself, there's nothing you could ever do in the sugar. The sugar itself had the shear to Mevatel L'Chametz in the first place, and yet we have a chumrah, we have a minig that sugar is no good. If it wasn't done, and he adds, here's where he adds, Kol Shlei Nasa LaPesach B'Shmira Mechametz. So even he's conceding, and I'll get to that in a second, that we're not talking about with hechsher, but stam sugar, which, mostly did not come with hechsher. So because there's this chumrah, because we have this minig, so Mamela, even though what's the chashash here, even it could just be a mashu of chametz, but we're not mechalik. So Mamela, the sugar itself can never become mutter. So Mamela telling me that it's not osir machmas atzmer and that it's terevis. Well, none of that works because it's the ikr and it's considered like it's be'en. And Mamela, he has to. That's his maskana taka. He says, if the sugar itself was the roiv and the yayin was the miut, you would know, you'd never have a question, because we know that, so Mamela, I'm telling you that kol David L'Taima is considered like the roiv, ikar u'karoiv. Now is his maskana taka. So as late as the 1870s, someone is still saying that the Shulchan Aruch says sugar is no good. It's chumrach shash. Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? But that's what we're going with. Now, of course, as I just said, this is talking about stam sugar before organized hechsherim fully took root. Mashenkin, if there was a hechsher, then it seems like almost everyone seemed to think the din wouldn't apply. And al derech zeh, you have this big discussion even without a hechsher, but everyone kept on saying, we know about how production is today, and there's no special connection anymore between sugar and chametz, more than any other product. But on the other hand, you still see this lingering concern, and you see that there were some gedolim, the ringshim of some sefer, and some of his talmidim, their minig was not to have any sugar on Pesach, period. And it's based on these kinds of mekaydes. And later on, I'll quote from the Chabad mekaydes. Now, there's one parsha, even more recently, where the shaila of sugar, mamash, flared up, la halacha. It was World War I, and that's when the question of what to do with stam sugar came up. A number of choshev rabbanim wrote on the topic. The first, main one you could say is Rabbi Zirelson of Kishinev. For those who might not be familiar, Rabbi Zirelson, he passed away in 1941. He was the Rav of Kishinev, and then later the whole Bessarabia, which had first been part of Russia and then ended up part of Romania. He was part of Me'atzis Gedei La'atei V'Agudas Yisrael. He was a senator in the Romanian parliament. He was actually killed in 1941 by an aerial bombardment in Kishinev. And then his connection to Chabad, the Fidig Rebbe has a letter where the Fidig Rebbe writes that Zilson learned as a bacher in Niezhin by Bisro Nayach, and he got smicha from Bisro Nayach, so he actually had a Chabad background. And he says when Rabbi Nayach passed away, he was mekusher to Shlomo Zalman of Kapust, was considered one of his gedolim mekusharav, and throughout all the major asifis that we know took place in the early 1900s, so Rabbi Zirelson was present at all of them, still part of Russia, so he was at the Russian conferences, and ever since the Mapecha, ever since the revolution in Russia, communism, so he was in touch with the Rebbe Rashab from then on. I guess that's when a more personal, close connection developed. And then after the Rebbe Rashab, Rebbe says, I myself was in touch with him. We overlapped in Yonei HaKlal. And he says, especially my Shiver, the Fidik Rebbe Shiver was from Niezhin. So, and Zirelson's background was from Niezhin. So he had a special, Fidik Rebbe notes that he had a special connection with Fidik Rebbe Shiver of Ram Schneers. So he has a small sefer of Shalos Teshuvos that he printed in Tafresh Pei Beis. And there you look in Siman Chaf. So it's addressed to a whole list of Rabbanim. None of the names or the places stood out or sounded particularly familiar. So I'm not going to get into the names. But the shilas that all the Rabbanim were sending to Zirelson was, can we be matir l'tzorech HaPesach in this year, Tafresh Ayin Daled, Stam Zucker? That's what stam zucker with a hyphen. That does not have a special hechsher for Pesach, kanohog, which is what we usually do, because of the tremendous war. Ein de metzias lahasig es ha muchsher lePesach. That was the big question that was bothering people in Tafresh Ayin Dalet. So Zirelson says on a long trip, Zirelson says that the way sugar is produced today, he uses the term rikuach hatzucker, is completely different today than it was in the previous generations, because once upon a time there was taka metzias of mixing flour into what he calls Zandzucker. So if you look up Zandzucker, so it's a term in German, and it refers to medium grain granulated sugar. So there's different levels of how the size of the grains, but it's powdered sugar essentially on that spectrum. So that's taka what the main chash always was, even Alter Rebbe, that's what Alter Rebbe is referring to. Powdered confectionery, that type. So they could either mix flour into that, or they'll dip their bread into the vat of sugar. But today, because industry has developed and been perfected, and especially tasiyat, he already uses the modern Hebrew word, the industry of the fabricatio of zucker befrat, that it's on the top, most advanced, sophisticated level. We know for sure that there's no chashash of any chametz mixed into the zand zucker, or not even into the Hutzucker. What is Hutzucker, Taka? So you look it up. In German, it's called the Zuckerhut. And Taka means, in English, you would translate it as a sugar hut or a sugar cone or a sugar loaf. It's still a thing. Apparently, it's like a holiday thing. And in Germany, they apparently used to produce blocks of sugar in that particular shape, and that's what you see all these farm referring to. So not in the Zandzucker, not in the Hutzucker. And or the pieces, for your tea and coffee, they started producing them in squares. So Kahai Gavna Vadai, the Ramah, and everyone who follows the Ramah would never have been Machmir in the first place. He says we already have Rabbi Yaakov Emden. Rabbi Yaakov Emden was already Mekel Lahedja in his Chuvas, Shelas Yavitz Chelik Beis, and he says until Rabbi Yaakov Emden gets carried away, which is maybe something that happens on more than one occasion, but in this case, Yaakov Emden writes, Hotzucker Hanikach Migoy Hador B'Shchunasi Hu Kosher Yoser Mikol HaMatzos Shalonu. My guy's sugar is more kosher than all our matzahs. Halavai shekazayas afikoymen she'achalnu yiyeh kol kach behechsher. Halavai the afikoymen should be so kosher. Yes, he had a sweet tooth. Yeah, right. Well, from a different shir, we know he got in trouble for drinking coffee from Goyim, so maybe there's a pattern, a connection. I don't know. And then you have the base mayor. So the base mayor is Mayor Posner. It was a rav in Schottland, in Danzig in Poland, and base mayor. It's not like on. It's one of the days that came on Rogatchover. It's not mamash on the daf, but maybe it's in the back. It was printed for the first time in the year 1787, around the time of Magid Mezritch, the Alter Rebbe. So the base mayor also essentially holds that there shouldn't be a problem with stam sugar today. However, the base mayor did write that although he would even though he would want to, he'd lean towards being matir mamash to eat, not just to keep it in your house or whatever. But he's chayshish for dvarim hamutarim v'acherim nogu b'hem iser. You have a concept like that? But that's the base mayor stops at that point. So the base mayor didn't actually go ahead and fully commit to the heter. But really, Rabbi Zirelson says, "Imisham Hole area," and in my opinion, and he is daiti, because the whole yisoid of being machmer is because they thought that there was a problem tag of chametz mixed in. And if it's not true, so we should count it as a tos. And if you look in Yedidei Reishia Dalit, it says over there that if it wasn't a tos, then the minhag stays a minhag. And if it was a tos, then you can cancel the minhag. So he wants the time that it's begader tos, which is a interesting claim. And Mamela, you could be matir because it was as if they never were makabel in the first place. He says, "Achar kolela mishum reimus kedushas haPesach," because Pesach is so great. Ein l'shanas b'shanim regilos meminig haprisha mistam tzukar. I'm not saying we should abolish the standard minig in a standard year to avoid stam sugar based on these mekayres, but b'shana haneichachis, because of the European war, the terrible war, you can't get sugar with a hechsher for Pesach. Because nichras oichel mipi ha'olam rachman al-Islan. I mean, any food we can get at this point, we're grateful for. Pshita for Simchas Yom Tov, you can be matir for Pesach stam tzukar. Of all the types that I listed above, he's not making a distinction whether it's powdered or not. But you have to warn the customers that when they buy it, to make sure that in the store itself, the guy's using clean kalim. So, but imzeh, you should let, he's writing to all these rabbanim that you should let everyone know befeidosh that it's only hiras shah, that doesn't apply in regular years. Haboyis the krasinim l'shalom, hoping that the years that come afterwards are more peaceful. So that's how he approached this question. We have another tshuva on this. There's a shas tshuvas Chaim Mordechai. So the Chaim Mordechai ruler passed away in 1946. These are getting to these are all Romanian rabbanim. We know that historically the Holocaust in Romania is interesting bit of history. Those who were in Romania proper were, I guess, basically spared. There were the outer parts of Romania where the Romanian government itself treated Jews very horribly. But if you were in Romania proper, you actually you could kind of survive the Holocaust where you were. So we'll see him and other Rabbanim that we're about to mention. So that's why he passed away in 1946 after the war. He just stayed in Romania. So he was a Rav in the city of Neamt or something like that in Romania for many years. And he has a tshuva and Siman Yud Gimel as addressed, and his sefer was printed 2 years after Zirelson's Atzei Halavonin was printed. And it looks like he's responding either to the sefer or maybe to when the tshuva was printed at the time. But he writes, La'arav Agoyin HaMefarsim Yehuda Leib Zirelson about the Keshnev, that it says clearly, that tshuva La'ravim, that is in your sefer Hayaker, Shut Atzei Lavonin, Halavonin, Siman Chaf, the Bimat Yistam Tzuk without a hechsher. And you ended off that it's only Rosh Hashanah. So I want to let you know what I told people who asked me at the time, and what I announced as Rosh Hashanah at the time was to take that you take stam tzukar, first of all, from the cleanest keli, the cleanest source you can find. And then before Yom Tov, to make like a syrup, to boil it into a syrup, and to use that on Pesach, because that's a bit of a shinoi. And that way, that's a way of getting out of the chash of the base mayor that it's dvarim mutarim v'achirim noga b'yisr. And even if it has tarevis chometz, but the Bali Shulchan Aruch say that lach balach, it's not chayzer v'ner. Even if you hold the chayzer v'ner on Pesach, but lach balach is not. So if you make it liquefied sugar and you use it in other dishes, so it shouldn't be a problem. And even though what you said was also pretty much Yipurim v'Yeduim, but in Chai Nefesh Tolei B'zeh, no one's life was, in the lurch, whether they could eat sugar or not. It's not called Pesach Dika sugar, so it's almost like considered Chametz Dika sugar. So it's a little hard to tell everybody go eat Chametz Dika sugar on Pesach. It doesn't sound good. So that was my Rosh Hashanah, and you saw Kadeshim, and they listened to my Eitzah, which I think was the correct one. So he didn't go as far as the Atzei Halavonim. Another tshuva we have from Shut Harabaz. Rabaz stands here, Rabbi Zev. His last name was Shafrin. He was a Rav in Romania as well. He passed away earlier in 1929. So he has a tshuva that ostensibly is about something else, but there's a ha'ara that touches on this. So the shaila is that he got a shaila from someone, from Pashkan, and the shaila was b'shem Admor Rav Tzadik HaMefarsim v'chulu shlita. So I haven't yet identified who the Admor Rav Tzadik was. That he had yain gefen, with all the yash you have in Svarim, so you start having Rosh Tevis of yag, when you want to talk about normal wine, so you call it yag, Yud Yud Gimel. So you have yag kosher from Basarabia, where the Yidden, of course, produced wine. And in this case, unlike in the case we started before, in this case, we don't actually know, and when I'm shik, we don't actually know why the wine is so sweet, but the wine is very sweet. This, the wine from that area. So he wants to know, the Rebbe, the Tzaddik wants to know if he's allowed to drink it on Pesach because he's chayshish that it's too sweet to not have sugar in it. He thinks there's zan sukkar taka, the same powdered sugar in it. And the Rama already said that sukkar is awesome. So he says, a lot of the tshuva goes along the same lines of what we've seen before, Madam Shik, or the Atzei Halavonim of Zirelson, so I'm not going to repeat all that. And he says, in this case, B'chlal, we don't even know that there's any sugar mixed in. He himself is coming up with this chash. Maybe it's mixed in, and that's already a suffix b'isr d'Rabbanan, because the sugar itself is dvarim matorim, and it's acherim nogu b'isr, and he agrees that it's betos, like the way Rav Zirelson said. And like the base mayor says, so it was kaim alon sabak d'Rabbanan mahakol, and no chash will be mizals and other things he says. He goes on in this vein, and then he says, why don't we just go ahead and be mater sugar officially for Pesach if it doesn't have a hechsher? Because Yisrael Kedoshim Nogu Lahachim B'chumis Yiseres L'Tzei Chag Pesach. If we're going to be matter to Ramoin Am to take stam zucker for Chag Pesach, so they're going to take from stores that don't keep it in a safe, chametz-free environment. So Mela, we're machmer to have mashgichim, which he calls them shomerim v'nemonim in the Beis Chareshes. And Mamela, they'll also, if you get the Pesach, you paid more for the Pesach of sugar, so surely in the store you'll also be more careful. That's how he wants to explain and phrase why Alpha Bikain, no one's actually coming out and being mater, stam sugar and stam a year. And then there's a footnote there. It says, Mamela, b'shas atchak, if you can't find with a hechsher, also stam zucker is fine. And that's what I replied to many who asked me, Dvar Rabbi Zirelson, b'shas hamchama, that's the same situation. They couldn't get the sugar with a hechsher, and I was matar as a hiras shah, even stam zucker. And he says, the like my shakosav, he did nafshi, the shut be'er chayim mordchai, and he quotes it. Because there's this whole tichet to start boiling your sugar, turning into syrup for Chag Pesach. It's a late seirach, no need, unnecessary, because he says dvarim mutarim and noga b'yisser is not an issue. His issue was that way we'll sidestep the dvarim mutarim and noga b'yisser. It's not an issue according to this mahalach. And also the chayzer v'neyer is not a chashash because this is not chametz yedua. It's just who knows, maybe that we don't say chayzer v'neyer in that case. He goes on with a lot of Marmakaimis to talk about this. So back to the Pnim, Hasal Kinon, that in this case there's no chash on the Yag, and Chak Harav Tzadik Shlita could use it for Arba Kaisis, Visim Vasim Vasaregel, he signs his name, Tzal Zev Shafran. Another source on this is the Shalos of Shuvas Eson Aryeh, Avraham Aryeh or Leibush Rosen. Also from Romania, passed away in 1951. Same story. He survived in Bucharest. Yes, I'm about to say that. So first of all, interestingly, he was a Rav for many years in Paltashan in Romania. And I'm trying to, did we mention Yassi and the halachic connection to Yassi in the previous year? I just can't remember right now. But Paltashan is also a city in Romania that had very ancient ties to Chabad. I believe there's even an interesting source where the Alter Rebbe is quoted as saying that Paltashan is always going to remain a Chabad outpost in Romania. So it says that this Rabbi Rosen, when he became the Rav or something, he had a position, his shtetl was in the Beis Knesset Chabad in Paltashan. I don't know if the Beis Knesset Chabad was actually Chabad or it was just a holdover from ancient times. There was always this interesting Chabad influence in the background in Romania. So his son, Taka, as you point out, was Moshe Rosen, was the rabbi of Romania from the late 40s through the 90s, and whatever connection there was with Chabad then as well. At any rate, the father's Shot, Eson Aryeh, was printed by his son-in-law, who was the chief rabbi of Scotland. So in Simon Kof Yud Ches, he writes, so he starts off at a later date, B'shnas Tafshin Aleph, so he already made it to World War II as well, and a bit of a repeat. Romania was definitely involved in the war, tremendously in the year 1941. So B'shnas Tafshin Aleph, there was no Tzivah Kosher Pesach, and everyone was asking again the same question: can we be mekel, and or like how can we be machshir the sugar? So I answered, Al Pi Yedua, we know in Shulchan Aruch Erechayim, Siman Taf Mem Zayin, Siman Taf Reish Zayin, and we already have the Stei Chamed. The Zirelson also was mitzayin to the Stei Chamed, where he was malakid all the days. And after that came Harav Agoyin, Zagna Shekana Chachma, first in B'chol Olam, Haril Zirelson of Kashnov, Shlita, and in parentheses Hashem Yikim Damai, was he's killed in the bombardment. In Atzei Halavonim, B'keicha De Teira, that in such a year it's fine. And see also Be'er Chai Mordechai, who didn't go as far as that. He says, they didn't make a distinction between the types of sugar, right? Rabbi Zirelson even mentioned all the types, and he said there's no difference. So they didn't distinguish between marusuk kachoil, powdered, or kachoil, like a kemach, there's different levels of granulated sugar, or pieces, sugar cubes. So, because at the end of the Mechama Neira in Romania, that in Tafresh Ayin Vav, and he says the simon for that is the pasuk arose, tzadek arose is Tafresh Ayin Vav. So it was a shas adchak. So in Tafresh Ayin Vav, he's recalling what happened in Tafresh Ayin Vav. There was a shas adchak with sugar. It's b'chlal, the price of sugar shot up. He says, I myself saw that the sugar, that the fine sugar had pieces of wheat mixed in by the Sachrim because it was a scam. Sugar was expensive, and why not mix foreign, stuff into it to get more, to give less for your money? So he's the only one who makes this claim that as late as Rabbi Shraga involved, and everyone's saying, sugar is, there's no chash, no problem whatsoever. He says, I know for a fact that the Sachrim were mixing the chitim in. And because of this chashash, even in Tavshin Aleph, I also asked the sugar, mechshash, chametz, gomor. And I was only matir the cubes if there's no powdered sugar on the cubes. So then I said that you can cook the cubes before Pesach with water until it melts, and then to filter it, to be masanin it through a thick mitbacha, so that way no chametz can get through, and not a regular metal strainer, because dafka material is not going to allow much ink in a strainer. Chametz can go through. It could be chametz be'en the Pesach. So here's someone with a totally different perspective on chametz at that time. Therefore, I announced in Paltashan to be matir dafka made sukkar dafka that year when there's no hashgacha, but not the shanim haboim l'kersenu l'shalom. And they were hoping for better times and better years, and then obviously. What may or may not have happened. But what I was building up to actually was that there's also a tshuva on this from the Rogatchover. And B'emes, I don't know if it's emphasized as much today. Today we emphasize the Chedushim of the Rogatchover, Chedushim of the Rambam, but B'chayav, the Rogatchover is actually from the Gedolei HaMeshivim. I think maybe some even claim the greatest in history. He used to get thousands, maybe tens of thousands of letters. Every kid, any person could send him a question. As long as you included the paid return postage, he responded on a postcard or whatever. So it's good to emphasize this aspect of the Rogatchover as well. So this is a practice shayla. This is printed in already in Tzapos Paneach Dvinsk, the original Shalos Tshuvas, one of the original ones. So in Chelek Beis of Dvinsk, Simon and Beis, there's a shaila. It says, Al dvar hanoigim shlelechoel zucker zolosi shel Pesach and muter lecho b'shasat chak she'art zucker she'em b'shim chashash chimetz. It's from the same period of time. I'll say the date in a second. And I haven't seen anyone who was mefaneach this particular tshuva yet, so I'll try to be mefaneach for you. So he starts off, tshuva, Erev Chag Pesach, Tafel Shai involved, so it's the same period of World War I. And then, right off the bat, there's already a mysterious Asher Tevis. It says, Kof Mem Reish, space, Pei Ayin Samach Gimel Daled, apostrophes Reish. What on earth does that mean? And I know there's some places where the Rogatchover writes like interesting Ramazim. I think Dafka maybe out of Pesach, he had a certain Nemes he used to write every year. But I looked it up, so apparently, Kof Mem Reish stands for Kiryas Melech Rav. And the letters afterwards, it's pashut someone didn't understand what he wrote. It's supposed to be Pei Ayin Tes Gimel Reish Daled Petrograd, because we know the Rogatchover escaped from Dvinsk during World War I. He ended up in Petrograd. Petrograd was the name of between Petersburg and Leningrad. There was Petrograd, and so Kiryas Melech Rav Petrograd. So we already refaneach something here. So he says, "Ayem kibalti mechtovei al dvar zucker." So this is the Rogatchover's line of thinking. He says, "Hine zeh vadai kol davar she'osru mishum chashash takala or gzeira loy plug." Lays a veka yisoid that if it's based on a chashash of a takala, something doesn't go wrong with the gzeira. Then once we establish that, then we actually don't make any distinctions. Well, in this case, there's no concern for a takala and a gzeira. And then he starts rattling off different examples that he has of this, and you look around, you see there's different places where he brings some of these, or many of these. So the first one he says is, Bahach da halacha kirav meir b'gzeira Yosef. So this is another place where the Rogatchover quotes this taka where it mamish applies. So in Hilchos Gerushin, the Rambam talks about a shifcha shel shtachrara, and if you Yerush and Esgaira, you have to wait 90 days. And even if it's a ger ve'ishtash in his gairu, you still have to wait 90 days. So the Rogatchover says, I am divrei harav magid, And Rabbi Magid writes that Dafke married, because then there's a concern of Zera, but if they're not married, then the Mitzvah there's no concern. Wait, Cheshiv is no, that's a whole discussion. But the Rabbi Magid says that it's not a concern. But the Rogatchover seems to disagree, because the Ram Taked wasn't Mechalik, I guess. And he writes, Vatam, this is in Chedushim Gerishin, Vatam, the Svirale Rabbeinu, the Zebechlal Bzera, the Tzorech Lahamtin, the Loimitam Havchana. Not a word of Havchana, talking to see this or that. It's a din, like Zahu din. And that's what it says in the Gemara, halacha k'Rabmeir b'Gzeira Yisrael. It says in Ksubas that you have a case of a regular Yiddish girl where the situation is that there's different reasons why she shouldn't have gotten pregnant lately. She was going to Beis Aviyah, there was Kas with Beis Bailer, her husband was in jail, he was in Medina Sayyam, he was a Zakin, he was a Chayla, she was in Akara, Zkaina, an island, a Sektana, and a few more. So the mayor says, Kulon tzricha islahamtin shleisha chadashim. Rabbi Yossi disagrees. And Amr of Nachman, Amr Shmuel, halacha k'Rabmeir b'Gzeira Yisrael. So why are we paskening that? So it's in Eleimar, the Gzeira hi al hadover, lo al adam ho'esa hadover. It's on the Zach, not on the person. So there's no, you can never be mechalik. If it was on the person, the Oz, yesh l'chalak ben Tana l'gdayla, Mashenkin, Magzeira hu al hadover. So that's the word of halacha k'Rabmeir b'Gzeira Yisrael. Just writes the 3 words here. And then he says this is also connected to the Mechlekes and Bechayres, Daf, Lamed Vav. That it says they're not Mechalek between a Chaver and an Amaretz by a Kayan. So if you look it up over there, it's talking about Bechayres Taka Mum. And the question is, can you trust the person himself, the Kayan himself, to tell you that there is a Mum? And there was a Meister of Tzaddik that he hung something on the animal, and the animal cut its lip, but it was totally not on purpose. And he came to, and he was a Kayan, and he just, okay, I want to say that I saw that there's a mum. So he came to Rabbi Shua, and Rabbi Shua said, Klom, Chilaknu, or the other way around. He asked Rabbi Shua, Klom, Chilaknu, ben Chaver, Lama Aretz, meaning an Amma Aretz, we surely shouldn't trust, but maybe a Chaver, is there a difference? Rabbi Shua, Hen. Yeah, there is a difference. Then they came to Gamliel, and Gamliel said no. And he said, oh, but Rabbi Shua said yeah. He said, okay, let's investigate. They came to Rabbi Smadrish, and they asked the question again, and they asked, is there a difference in a Chaver and Amaretz? And Rabbi Shua says no. Maybe you've heard of the continuation, the Ma'aseh of the Gemara. Rabbi Shua says no. So Gamliel says, wait a second. I heard in your name, Rabbi Shua, when they asked you before, you said there is a difference. Yeshua, we have to get to the bottom of this. So Rabbi Shua said, hey, what should I do? If I was alive and Reb Tzaddik was dead, if you're familiar with that Lashon, that's where it's from. So Rabbi Shua was caught, so to speak. He had to admit that he had originally said there is a difference. But the maskana is that there's no difference. So this is machlekes. The maskana is, the Rogatchover says, that lo yichilku ben chal ha'aretz. It says, l'chayre is a shtickle, you can ask a shtickle kasha. He doesn't ask it as a kasha, but, it says it casually. You look in Gittin, there's a mission that says, kol get sheyesh olav eid kusi, pasul chutz mi gittin nashim. And where it says, what's going on here? This is not Tanakama, not the Belers, and not Mishim Gamliel, because when it comes to matzahs, it says, Tanakama says that the matzah of a kusi is mutter, you could be Yitzhar, and Belazar says no, because they're not baki and Tuktuke mitzvahs, etc., or matzahs. And the Belazar, so the Gemara says ultimately that Gemara is going through all the day. It says if it's a Belazar, if he doesn't hold their matzahs are good, why should he hold the get is good? It says that there's a kusi signature and then a yid signature after him. We trust the yid that the yid signed after the kusi, so he knows that this kusi is a chaver. He's not the kind that's not baki b'tuktuke mitzvahs. So in this situation, Rabbi Lazar will say that we accept the kusi chaver. So the Rogatchover's implied question here is, you're not mechalak between a chaver and a ma'aretz by a kohen. And again, you tell me you're being mechalak between a chaver and a ma'aretz by a kusi. So the Rogatchover says, so Chayres lechilku, gabi kusi chilku begitten, batam, the gabi koyen, rak takona, veloy mitam chashash mamash, lochin loy plug. It's just a takana, so male doesn't matter. Mashenke bekusi, yesh behem chashash mamash, lochin chilku. At the kusi is tak a real chashash, a real concern, so you have a way of getting around the concern. This is good. Then he says another example. Hach de beitza daf yitchesem and aleph gabe tvilas kelim b'yomtov. Look in beitza. So the Mishnah talks about toiveling kelim, and then the Gemara says the kuli alma. Everyone agrees that keli b'Shabbos you can't toivel a keli on Shabbos. What's the reason you can't toivel a keli on Shabbos? Rabbi said Gzeir Hashem yitlanu b'yodav yavirenu arba amas v'rishos harabim. The Gemara says, okay, hatinach Shabbos, but Yom Tov ma'ikal meimar. What about Yom Tov? You could be ma'afir b'rishos harabim on Yom Tov. What's the problem? What can go wrong? So where it says, my commandments, where it says, goes to Yom Tov atu Shabbos. So the Rogatchover says, wait a second, think about it. He says, it's a gufa muteres b'Yom Tov. Carrying itself is fine on Yom Tov. And you're coming and telling me that gzeiru atu etza yeshna b'Yom Tov. How does that make any sense? So he says, weiter, you see this word, that is a gzeira Hashem yaviru. So if it's a gzeira, even the Hitzah itself is not a gzeira. Hitzah itself, here it's mutter, here it's also a gzeira shema. We don't start looking whether the shema applies or not. The gzeira is a gzeira across the board. Now the next example he brings is in Demai. It says here Perek Daled, but it's a mistake. It's actually Perek Beis. Perek Beis and Demai. He does bring it in one or two other places. There's a Mishnah in the beginning of Perek Beis of Demai that there are certain products, certain peiros, or not just peiros, grain and vegetables, that they're misasrin Demai b'chol makom, because the product is so identified, so associated with Eretz Yisrael. It's an Eretz Yisrael product that you see it, you don't have to ask where did it come from. You know that it's from Eretz Yisrael, so mainly you have to be choshesh for Demai. And then the Yerushalmi Shtelzer immediately brings from Maseches Maasros that there's also a list of the opposite, a list of things that we know for sure from Chutz La'aretz. And then there's like a back and forth in Yerushalmi that's a bit unclear what the pshat is or how the Rogatchover is understanding it. But there's a word over there that Rabbi Lazar said that there's a difference between a goy and a yid. Then there's one thing if you take it from a goy, there's another thing if you take it from a yid. And there's this idea that he's choshesh l'miyot. And then the Gemara says, the Rishon says, if you're choshesh for miyot, then what if a ger comes? Should we be choshesh that he's from Amin and Moav? So the Rogatchover takes away from this Yerushalmi is what he writes in his other places. The hani minim the tiknu lahafash mem demai have a gather takana afam on a yodim bevider shekvar nifresh mem lahapach. That's what he takes away from this Yerushalmi. That doesn't matter whether you know it's from Chutz La'aretz, whether you know it was separated, and that's what he writes over here as well. The afam bo me Chutz La'aretz mikom makom kiven the gozer alaminam halalu tzarech minyan lahater. It's a gzeira, and you can only be mater gzeira with another minyan of chacham. Another thing he brings is from Pesachim. It says in Pesachim that you shouldn't use kimcha da'avishana in a pot, which is roasted flour in a pot, because maybe it's not roasted properly. And the Rogatchover takes away from that Gemara from Rashi there that even if you did chalita, it wouldn't work even if you boiled it. Why shouldn't it work? Weiter. Because once you have a chashash, the chashash stays. There's another thing from Demai. In Demai, so one of the places where the Rogatchover goes through a lot of these rayas and makayres is in his chidushim hilchos matnas aniyim. So there he spells it out a bit more. It says, "Ayin b'Yerushalmi Demai peragim halacha daled." It says there that if Am Haaretz tells you that there was problematic peiros tvua, and if he tells you that he switched them and he put mitukanim tachteyem, so l'chayra maybe we should believe him. But if he says that the peiros are shaloi, his own peiros, then we don't believe him. Because Am Haaretz, the whole chash is on the peiros of an Am Haaretz. So, l'chayra, though, there should be a migo over here. If he said it wasn't his, if he said I went and took care of someone else's peiros, we would believe him. The second he comes and says it's my peiros, it's usher. So he says, "Vatam kim in the zav atakana this shall amaretz after whom mistam maaser mikomak and cause manch the people of chavros. The whole concept of demai is that technically even amaretz probably separates maaser, but we're not sure. We have exera, so we created this exera where we disregard the evidence of whether or not he is maaser bazoi. Even amigo won't help you. If he's not makabel chavros, he's not makabel chavros. Then he goes off into Kitnius, and he says, he says, those who are machmir Kitnius, he seems to be referring Pasha to not a mucker, but Pasha to practice. He says, once we were machmir Kitnius, Kitnius is a problem of chimut, so you should only treat it as a problem if it gets wet. But Lamaisa, even if it's dry, we don't eat it. The manaf kamina behem bein b'mayim bein b'loy mayim kivin daleka behem chametz. There's no chametz in the first place. It's exera. So if it's no chametz in the first place, then it's exera. So who cares if there is water? There isn't water. That's the idea he's trying to drive home here. And then he brings even more examples available. I think that's enough to give you the idea. Then he goes off into the whole gather of Kitnius, Mishum gather Pas. Anyway, to get to the end, to the punchline, the Rogatchover says, so it says, Ach kol ze im have minig shalei lechot zucker b'Pesach ukamei minig Kitnius. This would all be the case if there was a minig not to eat zucker b'Pesach, and we treated it just like mamash like Kitnius. He says, but because the practice is to eat Pesach dika sugar, and in this case we know that once we establish there isn't a problem, we say that you are allowed to eat it. Say bazoi, even stam sugar, if you believe there's no chashash. So for the logic we use here is when there's a chashash. Yeah, when there's no chashash, no. That's how that's his halachic here. Machmas Krisis Ayam Tefakatzer Yedido Yosef Rosen Choigu Chaga Pesach Bekashras. I did see that someone understand the Rogatchover to be saying that it actually depends on how far you take your minig of sugar. That those who treat the minig of sugar that no matter what, so then in Bazoi, then it shouldn't be a difference b'shas atchak. Mashenkin, if you eat behachsher, so then even so then b'shas atchak, this should also be fine. There's also a I noted it somewhere here. There's also another tshuva from the Rogatchover about this. It was printed in Noyam by Rabbi Menachem Kasher from Tavish Tzadik Daled, and I'm just going to note it in 10 seconds. He asks there, I got the letter about the zucker. He launches again into the same Anika Safti Kvar Kach Daran Svirale the Kol Dover Shazarak Mamas Rachaka Ef Shalahatu Al Yedei Eitza. He goes through, and there's like 23 Marmakemas here. And we're missing the end of the tshuva, so it's not even clear what he said in that situation, whether he said the same thing or whether it's kafir again, that this is a little different. Once we're talking about the Safras Paneach and Pesach, my original concept going into this was actually I thought that maybe we would go through a few inyanim of the Rogatchover that have to do with halacha with Pesach, but at the rate we ended up going, so there's no forgetting anything else. I just wanted to note just an interesting thing also that Hagav with the Rebbe. At the only place in the Kutei Sichos where the Rebbe quotes Chedushei Agra, Chedushei Reb Chaim Alevi Brisk by name in the Pnim of the Sicha as part of the Hemshech Ha'inyan is in the Kutei Sichos Chelik Chavav Boy Beis, where the Rebbe asks on the din of the Rambam that a cotton shehigdil between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, if they were shoichet all of Berishin, if they included him in the first Pesach, he's potter, even though he was a cotton. And the big question everyone asks is, how did he become potter? By participating as a cotton? So the Rebbe says in the beginning of the first page of the Sikha, in Chedush Reb Chaim Alevi, he explains that Inyan Iker Din Minoi is Sarabu Gam Ketanim Mikra de Selaboyas. That it's a din in the Minoi of Pesach that they are included somehow in Selaboyas. And the Rebbe says, Yisei Mizu Gefintman in Safras Paneach. The mitzvah celebrates office. No, the child is still not included. But there's something that's a gather of a minoi, and through the gather of a minoi, he can become a part of the Bnei Chabura, and of course, look in the Sikha, the whole Hamshach HaSikha expands on that. So just interesting to note, if you look in the marker of this in Motzei Shabbos Parshas Tzav, Tav Shalom Tes, in the back of the Likud, it says the Hamshach, Tzav, Achon Pesach, Shmini. So if you look in the beginning in Tzav, Tav Shalom Tes, so the Rebbe said, Zayin Dov, Deruf, Tzvei Biyurim, this question, der Bier von Reb Chaim HaLevi und der Bier von dem Rogatchover, was die zwei Goyim seinen gewähnt bis Mann Echad und haben Falpel gewähnt zwischen sich und jeder von sich hat Talmidim und Talmidim. So the Rebbe is sort of setting the scene of the history of those Goyim in that period of time. And then the Rebbe says, und da zet mir die zwei Fani Limud, der Derech HaLimud von Chaim HaLevi, Vevar sein jeden Inyan, Ayadei HaMoka, Al-Asar. No din has anything to do with another din. Each din you have to choice the hesber from the pratim of that din. The derech halimud from the Rogatchover zuchen in yeder inyan a klal was is giltik b'chol ha'Torah kula. The Rogatchover dafka looks for something that encompasses the whole Torah, and you see the way the Rebbe is setting it up, obviously, and that's how the Sikha goes, and that's how the Likud goes. The Rebbe is trying to go with the Rogatchover's approach, and that even his hesber here was a more global understanding of how this minui works. So just Lohar, it's connected to Pesach, the Rogatchover will suffice with that on the topic of the Rogatchover. And the Gei Lamaisa, so once again, we turn to Bishul Munchan, Chabad. So first of all, there's a letter of the Rebbe Rashab, where the Rebbe Rashab also writes, the Yein Geffen, the Yag for Pesach, should not have any Tarovis Zucker. The Fidig Rebbe in Sikha says that the Rebbe Rashab was always made sure there was no sugar. Look at the Sipurim. They made a kiddush, and he writes, Perlov writes that they made a kiddush in Rebbe Tzunifka's house. And he thinks it was even Achon Shal Pesach, and she said we have to. She was serving Pesach Dikim Zaynis. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but that's the word he uses. And she said that it's sugar free. And why is the Zaynis sugar free? Mein Sohn nitznit. And then there's the famous story that is told by Bianca Lando and his Hashimis, and by others, Parlov and his stories of the person that wanted to convince the Rebbe Rashab. Otherwise, first of all, he says, what was the Rebbe Rashab's real reason? So Bianca Lando writes that I heard the Fedish from the Rebbe Rashab that he said they were sitting together, the Rashab, the Razah, his brother-in-law, Reb Harnstein, and his brother-in-law was saying a story that they went into a sugar factory, and they told the director of the factory that the zucker nit verkocht, the sugar is not boiling properly. So the director went out and he pulled out a pulver, some mysterious powder, some substance, and the zucker nit verkocht. So, and there's the Rebbe Rashab says, they're just telling stories, they're schmoozing. Mir is das a reinen Kopf, the Rebbe Rashab says. This went into my head. A pulver! Darf man doch wissen, was for a pulver? So that the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe Rashab told him personally. And he says, das is man sagt, das tammert man eingetunkt breit, das is Narishkeit. They say, the chash today is that there's bread in the factory. The zucker b'shaser kocht is 1000 grad. It's 1000 degrees the way they boil the sugar now. How would you be sticking things into while it's boiling? It says, gornit beglev tutzukumim. Then he says, af melt zucker, that's only for blocks of sugar, but for melt zucker or powdered sugar, is yedach shash, because it does dry in the open, can Wasser reinfallen, hartet zucker is nitkin shash. That's what the Rebbe Rashab, he writes down in Yiddish, what Yankov writes from what the Rebbe Rashab told him. And then you have the famous Maisa, where Moshe Hardenstein tried to convince Rebbe Rashab that he has a factory, and he'll get new kalim, no Hagala, none of that. And he brought it there for Pesach, and he explained all the pratim, and the Rebbe Rashab was getting more and more serious and more uncomfortable. And the story is that he broke open a sugar cube, and there was a wheat kernel inside. So that's in Shmos Sipurim and in the Likutei Sipurim. On the other hand, there are two Makairis in Chabad that say maybe not to go so far. So in Alekach Valibov, he says that there was a Maisa with a Maimer that he went in to do Chazara on the Maimer. And Pshilim Mamish didn't have the Maimer straight, and everybody had to repeat the whole Maimer. And Chanan Arose was there, so he said as a joke that Mr. Reb Shillim doesn't know the Maimer right because today he drank tea without sugar. So it's Pesach. So Rabbi Shab said, I don't appreciate being imitated. Rabbi Shab was Nizer, but he seems to be expressing displeasure that, Taka, maybe, if it's Taka true that Rabbi Shillim didn't drink sugar and that's why he didn't remember the Maimer, maybe they wasted Rabbi Shab's time. Maybe that's more of the context there. But that's what Rabbi Shab said. And there's also in Melech B'Mesiboy, in one of the conversations, they recorded that Rebbe said that I don't know if it's at all at Abim, not to use it, even though the Rebbe and the Shemesh the Rebbe also didn't use sugar, and from what we know, it seems like the Rebbe also didn't use sugar. But the Melech B'Mesiboy, the Rebbe says I don't know if it's at all at Abim, and if someone does it himself or knows it's Nokshash, there's no reason the Rebbe is saying to Aser. Then Moshe goes through the other tzaddikim and Mekayris that were nizar not to have sugar as well. So it is a concept. So Lamaisa, to conclude, Lamaisa, from what I understand, among Anash, there are some I think that are taka completely avoid it. And then there are some that buy with a hechsher and they boil it and they filter it. And Chaim Shapiro already commented on that, his opinion on that practice. Upon him, we see that there's actually a very, very, very lengthy halachic background to this issue. The kahena, we know the Yonim of Pesach are the chamuras, sheba chamuras. Virchas chakash b'sameach.